I mean, maybe to start, we could just say who we are and who's in the room and where we're coming from. Just kind of a welcome in. Uh, and we could say what time it is where we are, uh, where we're located, and how we're feeling today, if that works. So I'm Christian Anderson. I am coming to you from the land of the Coast Salish Duwamish peoples in Seattle. It is 7 a.m. here, and it is a nervous day here in the United States. For reasons you may or may not be aware of, that I will speak to a tiny bit more in a moment. But I'm glad to be here, and I think this is a good way to start it off. And I will go to Tom.
Yeah, hi everyone. Greetings. I'm in the north of Spain, in Asturias. It's 4 p.m. Yeah, I'm having a bit of an afternoon energy low, but I'm looking forward to hearing what everyone says and getting energized from the work you guys do, because I know it's exciting, and hearing from everyone. And yeah, Marcus, how are you?
Cheers, I'm Marcus. I'm based in Leipzig in Germany. Here it's 4 p.m. And today I don't feel that much energized. I already wrote to the organizers. Unfortunately, some back pain from playing too much with my child yesterday, but I'm still very curious about the conversation. I hope I will be able to stay until the end. I would then give floor to Anissa.
Thanks, Marcus. It's good to see you. It's good to see familiar faces and some new faces. I'm Anissa. I've recently moved to Burlington, Vermont, so also just feeling the tensions here. Feeling like a little bit of an observer. Of course, I can't participate in the voting, but it's around. And yeah, I guess this morning a friend of mine shared an Instagram post with me from the NDN Collective, which some of you might be familiar with. It's an indigenous, based in the Americas, an indigenous collective. And this post was about, we never vote for the people that we want, but we vote for the opponent that we think we could engage with. And that helped to kind of put things in perspective for me today. Happy to be here. Over to Sophia.
Hi everyone, I'm Sofia, and I'm from Guatemala in Central America, but I'm based in Asturias as well, in the north of Spain. Yeah, I do anthropology, and I'm very looking forward to learn and hear others' experience. So I'll pass it to Tim, maybe.
Yeah, my internet's not very good. If it struggles, I might have to find another room. But I'm in England, on the south coast, in a small town called Bridport, which is in the southwest. And yeah, I am a researcher at the University of Plymouth. I work for a social enterprise called Wessex Community Assets, and I'm also working with another one called Dorset Community Energy. I'll talk a bit about that. And I'll pass to Marcelo. I don't think you've spoken.
Thanks, Tim. Hi, everybody. My name is Marcelo Vieta. I am in Toronto. I am a mere hour away from the hour and a half away from the American border. So is it very much in Canada, the US election, it resonates. I am at the University of Toronto, the traditional lands of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas. And I do work in Toronto and Canada, in Costa Rica, in Argentina, in Latin America. I'm an active member of CERN LA, the regional, and I'm interested in anything to do with communities taking back their economies, in various ways, especially co-ops. So really happy to be here. Thanks for the invite, and looking forward to the conversation. I will pass on pass the floor to Zeynep.
Hi, this is Zeynep Özsoy from Istanbul. Actually, I'm from a business school, Altınbaş University, and I'm interested in mainly cooperatives and also other social solidarity economy organizations. So that's all for me. Thank you for invitation. I will pass to, I'm sorry, to Laura.
Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Ecker. I'm connected from Italy. Here it's 4 o'clock. And I'm a PhD candidate in economic geography working on a platform cooperatives. And I'm looking forward to hearing your discussion. I pass to Christina.
Hi, everyone. I'm Christina. I'm based in Malta, so it's 4 p.m. over here. I think it's been quite an okay day, like not too rushed, not too busy, but still productive. And I look forward to this conversation, and I need to apologize beforehand, but I need to leave early, so I'll be with you till around like 5-ish or so. And I don't know who didn't. Anna, I don't think you spoke.
Yeah, I think I'm the last one. Yeah, my name is Anna. I'm calling in from Massachusetts, UMass Amherst, where I'm visiting, and it's definitely an interesting time to visit, and we'll be watching the election tonight with some other PhDs here. So it'll be an interesting anthropological endeavor for me. But yeah, obviously very real as well, for everyone. My work is actually in the Netherlands, where I'm working on local food systems, food forests in particular. So I'm very interested to hear about your thoughts on the topic and the discussion. And I think that was it. So then I will pass it to anyone. I'll pass it back.
Nice. Thanks everybody for coming and for introducing yourselves and being on camera and all that good stuff. It's appreciated. And I hope everyone who is here will feel free to jump in on the conversation, ask questions, whatever makes sense. So I'll just offer a very brief framing and then we'll jump in, and I will share that, you know, when we organized the session, the idea was to make it pretty informal and to make it a space where we could have conversations and ask questions and kind of riff with each other rather than having it feel like a academic panel where you just get talked at. And especially since for a lot of you, it's that time in the afternoon when, if you're like me, you get a little sleepy. I hope that's a good thing. And I hope we can bring a little bit of energy. So I will just share super briefly the sort of organizing ideas behind this. Can you all see that? Yes, awesome. So this isn't going to be much more beyond what was actually in the session description, but I think it's useful to say. So, you know, the idea here is connecting across productive localisms, and I just wanted to kind of define what we meant by that and clarify a couple things and just say a tiny bit where I'm coming from, and I'm happy to say more about that as we talk. But just to sort of frame the terms and the question, so in the description, here's what we said. So localist production, we're thinking about forms of material production, like local manufacturing, production of landscapes and places, forms of ecological production, but also, and maybe those are attached to these, you know, prior listed forms, but maybe they're sort of different undertakings. forms of cultural, epistemological, and subjective production, including the use of participatory protocols and processes to produce new relations and modes of living. And I'm pretty excited to have this conversation with the CERN group because I feel like we have interesting insights into sort of both sides of those things. So CERN has a long tradition sort of in conversation with, I don't know, I almost think of it as like a regional tradition where people are doing interesting work with community economies in different spaces. And a lot of that has to do with, you know, livelihoods, forms of different kinds of material production, local economic activity. But at the same time, we're really attentive to these questions of subjectivity and of imagination and narrative and kind of the way that people imagine themselves in relation to economies and in relation to one another. So I think part of the proposition is that, you know, we can think those two sides sort of at once and maybe in sort of productive relationship with each other. And so there's all kinds of different examples that we might think about here, including, you know, around livelihoods, different frameworks of struggle in different human environment relations, in relation to climate change, political fragmentation, right? And just to like 100% put my cards on the table, I am involved in a couple of local projects in Seattle that probably wouldn't understand themselves in terms of production, but I'm looking at the political landscape in the US and I'm looking at climate futures and I'm talking to people about what I can do. And one of the main things I'm hearing is that local forms of solidarity, networks, governance, capacity will be really important in the event of the election of authoritarian on the one hand, and in a future with increasing and unpredictable different kinds of climate-related things that need to be negotiated, mitigated on a regular basis. So part of my thinking for organizing this panel was I would love to hear from people in CERN who are thinking about this stuff and kind of try to think across some of those examples and learn from the people who are already out there doing this amazing work. And that's why we sort of ended up with the session. So, and part of that was sparked in relation to the last things here, sort of failures and vulnerabilities of globalization involving supply chains, mismatches between productive capacity and economic activity. That's stuff that I'm riffing on that came directly from the work of people who are going to talk about their work on this panel that I've seen talk before and been inspired by. So the question is really, what can we learn from thinking across these different kinds of examples? What kinds of insights, strategies, potential futures might emerge? I'm also interested in, you know, potentially different protocols or learning about the way that people who are engaging in these work in different spaces are thinking about these kinds of questions, things they're reading, the way they understand themselves. So all kinds of things. And I'll stop with that, but I am obviously excited to be here. And I think these are interesting and urgent questions. So with that, the way that we've organized it is the people who were listed on the session program. So Tim, Marcus, and Tom are going to offer some brief sort of summaries of work that they're doing and some of the, you know, interesting things that emerged from there. And then I would invite anybody else who has things to share to jump in and share. But also, I'm hoping we can have a productive conversation and ask questions. And we could do it in whatever way makes sense. So we could take questions after each individual, you know, presentation, or we could save questions and conversation to the end. So maybe we'll wait till after the first presentation and then get a vibe for how people want to proceed. Are there any questions or clarifications before I tap someone to start talking about their work? Okay, cool. Well, thanks all for coming. I'm super excited about this. I would propose that maybe we go with Marcus or Tom first, since Marcus has back pain and Tom mentioned that he's low energy. We could get, you know, I don't know if you're a person who gets more energy or numbed pain from presenting, or if it makes the pain worse. But I would suggest maybe one of you two jump in and go first. Does one of you feel like jumping in and rising to the challenge?
Go for it, Marcus. Come on.
I can do if somebody opens the presentation. That would be nice.
I got you, buddy.
Nice.
Okay.
Okay.
You just tell me when to click, all right?
Okay, yeah, I will then tell you next slide. So, yeah, perfect. Thanks for having me. Thanks for also introducing this topic so nicely. I'm here with, when I heard first local production, and when I read the description, saw that it was also so wide, I really appreciated it, because I'm the one who's doing research on enterprises, so that's what we usually associate with production. But I'm also actually really curious to get this, how you expressed it, strategies, insights, potential futures, actually across different kind of production terms. So let's see also what else we have in this discussion on enterprises, but this is really based on enterprises, what I'm doing. It's based on my PhD research mostly, and I call it localist production Armenia and Georgia with a question mark. We come very soon also why I call it a question mark, and I say I have some place-based considerations, and the reason for that, next slide please, Christian. I first wanted to start actually where my research is embedded, in Leipzig, in this research center, and the research title of the project I'm in is Innovative Technology Enterprises in Unlikely Places in Central Asia and Africa. And here you actually see also below in the description that I was supposed to analyze internationally successful technology startups in Armenia and Georgia. And yeah, later on, we figured out that maybe the idea to research them is part of the problem that should be overcome. Why would you need internationally successful technology startup companies in rural areas in Armenia and Georgia? But nonetheless, I was still kind of committed to this project, so it was not possible to go completely beyond it. And so there was a bit of an internationalized dimension within the companies that I research. And there's this next slide, please. Here you see already, I do not talk here so much about theories and whatsoever, but rather straight want to jump into the work I did in the last 4 years, mostly some, let's say, fieldwork, geographical fieldwork light that I call it. You see here on the map, Armenia and Georgia, between Russia, Turkey, Azerbaijan, and Iran. And you see the dots are the case study enterprises that I worked with. And today I will focus on two of them relatively close to the border with Turkey. In Georgia, it will be Natanaz's wine cellar, and in Armenia, it's Nairian. And the companies I basically work with are usually small enterprises, actually many different sectors. What they all had was some kind of a final product. And how I approached them was a mixture of, let's say, indicators initially, where I thought, okay, this could be a community economies akin enterprise, but then also, of course, I needed a kind of approval by the enterprises to work with them. And so a bit, the selection of the enterprises had also very much to do with who was really interested in working with me as well. And I won't also talk too much about the methodology, but generally you can consider that I spent around 2 weeks in each of these enterprises. I was around the regions there within the villages where they are located to see to talk also with inhabitants, with other key informants, and so on and so forth. Now, next slide, please. Straight into one of the case studies that I was working with. This is Natanaz's wine cellar. And this is a winemaker in the so-called Samtsa Javakheti region, which is close to Turkey, and it's also called historically Meskheti. So I'm not sure what you already know about Georgia, but this is in itself not a big news because Georgia is really right now well known for its wine history. And in fact, in Georgia, you have 525 varieties, and in the whole world, there are around 3,000. Georgia is also, with Armenia and Iran, considered to be one of the main spots in which viticulture emerged. But in the last few centuries, there was a trend that actually fewer and fewer were cultivated. And this was probably, let's say, the concentration of few cultivars was heightened in the Soviet Union, where there was a spatially not so complex system of commodity production, and the Soviet Union decided that one region or place should produce stuff, usually for the whole Soviet Union. And so in Georgia, it was Eastern Georgia, where they said, okay, this is the place of wine production because the climatic conditions are so good there. And the company that I worked with, this was in Western Georgia. And Western Georgia has, let's say, also a rich history of wine production, but then there comes a but. And the but starts probably with the Ottoman Empire. When the Ottoman Empire came, they destroyed the vineyards. Afterwards came the Russian Empire. The Russian Empire actually started to replace existing wine cultivars with varieties from France and the US. And then came the Soviet Empire that switched this whole wine production anyways to Eastern Georgia. So in this case, it's already, let's say, something remarkable that I will further dig in the next slide. But what I want to say here again, it's not exactly local production. So it is a local wine producer, but we have to be very clear that the consumption is actually only by rich clients. Some of them, let's say, the upper middle classes within Georgia, but I would say 90% of the wines, they go abroad. Here on the picture, you see actually the traditional winemaking technique in Georgia with just these clay vessels that are on the ground, which is called the Kvevri winemaking technique. That is nothing peculiar to this kind of winemaker, but this is generally widespread there. Next slide, please. So here you actually see below on the left, you see a picture by one of the most famous painters in Georgia, Pirosmani. And it's relatively small, but what you can see here is both fruits, but also some wine grapes. And this used to be a cultivation technique that is very widespread, especially in Western Georgia, the so-called Mallory cultivation technique, which is basically when the wine grape is growing in symbiosis along a tree, usually a fruit tree. And this, as you can just imagine, is very tiresome to also harvest this grape. So for commercial viticulture, this was never considered to be really an option. But this Natanadze, who you can see on the right, top on one of those winding wine grapes, he was just, let's say, intrigued to figure out from the stories of his father, who told him, you know, back then, we know from historical sources that there should be still a lot of endemic grape varieties in the forests. So what this Georgi Natanadze did, he went into the forests of his home region and tried to find some wildly growing wines. And some of these wines that he found, like really after 10 years of doing research, wandering in the forests, was like identifying up to 25 endemic grape varieties in the region and harvesting. So as you can guess, this is really tiresome because he has like 400 to 500 GPS points, and he's traveling to every of these points to collect the grape varieties, and then he's making some wines of his, which is maximum 8,000 liters. And right now he's actually also in the process of establishing a nursery to promote these endemic varieties, and is also trying to push further local farmers to use them. And this also can become very handy in the face of climate change, because these varieties, or some of these varieties, are probably better adapted also to climate change. Others might suffer. And I find also very interesting about this Natanadze that he is doing a lot of these pro bono consultations for smallholder farmers, telling them how they can actually go to really make the cultivation of these endemic grape varieties and also replace the older grape varieties that came there only with the Russian Empire, and that all have their issues actually in the territory of Meskheti. So now next slide with Nairian, and I think I already talk a bit much, so I try to make it a bit faster with Nairian. It's a cosmetics company in the Kotayk province. which is actually not too far away from Yerevan. And again, I guess there is a lot of criticism towards cosmetic companies to begin with. Again, it's super expensive, the products that you also see here. So I would rather not buy them. It's mainly bought again by upper middle classes within Yerevan, the capital city, or you might have heard that there is a huge diaspora of Armenians that live, for example, in the US. And for them, it's like a very, let's say, touristic thing also to buy one of these products. And let's say in this political economies terms, cosmetics is like usually criticized in the literature for a kind of alienated use value and not really reflecting the deep human needs. And there is kind of this criticism that one is making a profit from women's insecurities that are actually caused by the same industry and their advertisements. And while there is a lot of critical to say, of course, about the cosmetics company, there is something also to learn, which might be not, again, in completely local terms, but next slide, please. So Naidian is a cosmetics company with its own local eco farm in the Armenian highlands. And how it emerged is actually in the backdrop of multinational corporations selling off the land in Armenia and having their extractivist mining industries established. On the top, you see one example from the Amulzar gold mines. And this is the kind of backdrop where the founder of the company just said, I wanted to show that actually this land is not only there for multinational corporations to reap benefit, to reap profits, but also for Armenians to make thriving landscapes. So this has as much to do, I would say, with the production of commodities as with the production of landscapes. And one of the initial ideas was actually also to have only a kind of extraction of essential oils from wild harvested plants. But then the founders also figured out that there's this risk of, let's say, depletion or over extraction. So they figured out this eco farm would be better. For all kind of cosmetics, you actually need a lot of ingredients. So in Naidian, it's about 100 ingredients, and around 50 to 50 of them are grown on their eco farm. So it's a very agro-biodiverse place again, with a lot of rare plants, endemic plants, and usually also no pesticide and no pesticide usage. And basically also a lot of consultations that not only foster the official production, but also, let's say, the means of subsistence. So the founders also go to other farmers, they share some seeds, they tell them what to use the plants for medicinal purposes, but also, for example, for their own small-scale honey production that they might use at home or for selling a bit. And that's what I think is very inspiring with this Naidian. So now some more general considerations. Next slide, please. This is something that I would call community place value. And the background is basically this political economy stuff that I left out of exchange value, use value, surplus value, who appropriates it, who distributes it. And I was a bit dissatisfied with this kind of framing and thought, like, in addition to this, we need something like community place value. And the question that community place value probably asks is what kind of interdependencies, human, non-human, are desirable or undesirable in a specific habitat. And the emplacement framework that Elizabeth Barron, also from within CERN, has developed was a kind of, I think, very helpful in thinking about this, because as you might have realized, that much of what I have said is also can be understood as a history of displacements of peoples, plants, and animals. This is due to empires, the Russian Empire, the Ottoman empires, even genocide of the Ottomans to the Armenians. It is a history of misplacements and replacements, of cultivars, but it is also history of what Barron calls emplacement, which is basically understood as bringing, as a process that shall bring more resilient stage of communities, but which is at the same time attuned to a place. And I think this is what we see with these two companies, that although they must be not super localized, what they really do is they're trying to keep on thinking about traditions, to rethink how their own localities in which they live can actually become more resilient and more akin towards what we would probably term community economies. Next slide, please. So this is for the discussion. I use this emplacement framework, which is, I think, both local but also more than local processes, because some of these companies have, let's say, suppliers abroad. They have their clients usually abroad. These are upper middle class, and I think there's something to discuss. But the production itself, what they do, the landscapes, the commodities, there is still, let's say, a longer history behind it that I think we should take seriously. What I think we can also learn from these examples is that there is the importance of the feelings of belonging. So in Natenace, in the Georgian example, you have all this discourse about this historical Meskheti region. In Nairian, there is this discourse of actually this imagined community of the nation that is very important, Nairian, where I think the economic survival of the company of suppliers is tied to the survival of a nation, but also the aspirations of becoming, like, who do we want to be and which kind of collectivity do we want to live? But this espousal of emplacement, I think, should also take into account the history of dis- and misplacements in the region. And now I can just tell you has nothing to do with the empirics so far, but what I'm interested in my research and hopefully also beyond, and maybe others will expand on this, is how to support relationally embedded productive localisms to forge mutualistic relationships. And what I had in mind here, and I didn't talk too much about it, so these enterprises here, they are usually also linked to workers, right? And the workers in the Armenian and Georgian case, they are embedded in this kind of semi-subsistence economies where they would still have their own subsistence, semi-subsistence household plots. And usually there is this kind of narrative how capital preys upon this unpaid work of woman nature colony. But I also try to understand if we could think about the different kind of symbiopolitics between these household plots and enterprises, because I think there might be some strategies that these kind of both productive localisms can enrich each other. And yeah, now I'm done with the presentation. Thank you.
All right, that's fascinating. You've already given us a little mini analysis across a couple of different enterprises and laid out some questions and things to think about. I'm wondering if, since a few people mentioned that they couldn't stay the whole time, if we should keep going with the presentations and save our questions, or if people have like a burning question clarification for Marcus that must be spoken now. We could do that too. Yeah, Marcello.
In case I leave, because I do have to leave in 15 minutes, 10 minutes. Marcus, amazing. Is it okay, Christian, if I just say?
Of course.
It's more of a connection I want to make.
Right
thank you so much. That's brilliant research, and it's really interesting, and in particular how you're using the concept of emplacement. I myself use the notion of recuperation, recuperación in Spanish, as both a way of taking back what was once ours, and also recuperating what was once lost or what was once broken. And so the capitalist system appropriates, the value that workers and communities produce, right? So that's kind of my perspective, really, really broadly. I'm doing work in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, in particular with Ana Inés Eras right now, who is part of CEI and CERN. We've been working with local cooperatives, social cooperatives, assisting people with neurodiverse ways of living, integrating into the workforce. And also a new one that we're working with now, Colectivo Solidario. They basically are a hub of a network that brings in, they're basically working on food security issues, merging local producers with made marginal communities, urban communities. And we're, this is just, I'm going to put it out there, Marcus, maybe you and I can talk offline at some point. We're developing, and it's still in development, a way of mapping the network, a critical cartography of these value chains, but not in a business-like mode, but more in like critical cartography, helping to, using an inventory model to help this cooperative in a PAR method map all of their networks that they bring together, but also all the value that they're producing for the community. And I'm really intrigued by your work around notions of displacements, replacement, and placement. I just wanted to put it out there, and I'd love to talk to you about about methodological issues at some point, and see compare and contrast, and to learn more about how you engaged in this value production, local value production initiative. Anyway, thank you. I might email you.
And jumping in.
No, that's cool. Maybe also for others, if they're interested, what you say. I'm just very interested also in your value chain analysis, what it can be. And maybe others here could be also interested, or maybe also raise your hands already, and maybe we can have a conversation across people.
This is making me, I was getting excited too. And I was like, ooh, I want to get in on this conversation, even though I don't know that I have anything to offer. So I'm wondering if this might make sense. Like, if people are willing to put their contact info in the chat, I could get together people's contact info and then send a follow-up. And maybe we could do a thing where we like get little bios from people and get like maybe a little bit of like info on projects they're working on and things they're thinking through. And then we could like continue the conversation, because I think part of the goal here was just to invite people in and then open the space up and keep thinking about it from there. So I'm gonna put that offer out there to everybody in the room right now. If you put your contact info in the chat, let's share more and have a conversation, and that way we'll have it even if you need to pop out for the presentations. I'm excited about that. Love it. Okay. Well, that was generative. Thanks for jumping in. Anybody else have something you want to say, add, think about before we move on to another presentation? Okay, cool. Tom or Tim? Tom, I don't know if you gained strength or lost strength.
I'm okay. I'm surviving. Okay. I've got a pretty bad internet connection now, so I'm just gonna keep my camera off if that's okay.
Sure.
But yeah, Marcus, that was really great. I always love hearing about what you're up to, and really nice to see Marcelo having those links, and I can see that, yeah, the session has already been useful and worth it, so that's great. I want to share my screen. Can you see this? Oops. Does this come up?
Yes.
Yes. I'm trying to make it full screen. Okay. So I don't have anything particularly well structured, or we'll see. They're kind of reflections or thoughts. I wanted first to just think what localization, the term, where that appeared in my life, I suppose. And this is a photo from Genoa 2001, and this is the sort of peak anti-globalization movement sort of era. And then so in 2008, I entered undergraduate university and had this book on a reading list that I read. And I think it was quite formative in terms of letting me know about all of this questioning of globalized neoliberal economies and how they spread and the impact they have on communities. And It was the first time I ever read about the Zapatistas, for example, or, you know, all these local resistance movements to globalization. And it was the first time I sort of heard terms like alter globalization and other ways of thinking about global economies. So I thought, okay, this is really interesting. It was also 2008 was also when I really, and I think it was a peak of interest, sorry, I shouldn't, peak oil and climate change. It was like when this sort of came to a head, that I started getting involved in transition towns movements, for example, and interest in community resilience in the face of climate change and peak oil. And a lot of the interest in that was around cultivating local production, local food production, caring within communities. How do we create collective plans for reducing our dependency on global fossil fuel networks, et cetera, et cetera. So that's sort of the background that I grew up with, essentially, or came into this, got interested in economies, essentially, around that time. And the key arguments here were basically that there is no alternative to localism, in a sense, that the global economy, no one can argue that its fundamental basis. So this is Jerry Mander, one of the influential thinkers back then. That exponential economic growth, economies built for export trade rather than local needs, an emphasis on commodity accumulation, that these can really be sustained beyond a very short time. So the interest was framed on replacing beggar your neighbor globalization with better your neighbor localization. So these were sort of the framings that were quite common then, I think, or the ways of thinking. And then over the decades after that, up until I mean, it's relevant in a way with the election going on today with Trump and the rhetoric around America first and protectionism, and this sort of maybe form. There was basically a big switch where critique of globalization, what was seen as an inherently left-wing tendency over the decades, became a little bit yeah, it sort of diversified a little bit, and then you had various voices from the right and speaking up against it to protect local communities, to protect local jobs, to protect against the Chinese, whatever it is. There's all these frameworks. So it's interesting to me how this occurred, that something that was so inherent in left-wing politics, that you would critique globalization, became sort of untouchable, or that the left sort of forgot about or decided wasn't worth getting associated with questionable tendencies, such as sort of right-wing localisms and things like this. So one question I would have for discussion in general is, do others see this tendency as strongly or as black and white as I do? And if so, what sort of brought this about? I would just think that would be an interesting topic of conversation as to what happened since 2001, since Genoa, since peak oil, interest in peak oil in the late 2000s. What sort is going on anyway? So with my interest in this, I wanted to look at, especially after COVID had sort of disrupted so brutally so many supply chains and forced so many communities to question how they were having their needs met. Their needs met. I thought, okay, well, what are the forms of localism? What sort of contested localisms exist that might be interesting to look at? So I just sort of, in this paper, highlight a few that I think there's a sort of a messy spectrum, from hyper-localism and then open localism, which is more associated with the degrowth movement, for example. Cosmo-localism, which is more in peer-to-peer literatures. Foundational economy, which is looking at differentiating sort of the for-profit economy from the economy that really meets people's needs, and differentiates the export economy that governments like to focus on from the economy, which is actually what really sustains us. Developmental nationalism, which has maybe longer historical roots, and then a lot of discourse around strategic autonomy after COVID. So there were a lot of attempts from the very sort of village level right to economic blocs like the European Union starting to discuss critically what globalization is and how to respond to it, and coming up with lots of different answers, basically. So in this paper, I use some of the ideas that Eva Frankova and Nadia Johannesova, who are both part of CERN. So I used some of their earlier work from 2012, looking at the different dimensions of localism. I just thought this was the different dimensions of localization. So I thought this would be interesting just for people to be able to refer back to or go and search out, and to look at all these dimensions that they find within the complexity of what it is to localize. So this is environmental, economic, social, moral and ethical, ideological, etc. And kind of what I come out of at the end of that is a view of localization. I think this is going in the direction that Marcus was talking about emplacement, which is something a bit harder to put your finger on, and it's more of a process than some sort of definitive idea of where local starts and ends, for example. So it's a process of relinking producer, product, and consumer into a meaningful whole is one idea. There's also Marshall O'Neill writing about, again, a process whereby localities, regions, and nations seek to become as self-reliant as possible for their everyday needs, thus reducing their dependence on imported goods. And lots of sort of variations and different terminologies that I find quite interesting to think with, like ethical localization, open relocalization. And so a lot of this is linked into the work I've done over the years, so I won't go into any specific research project really. But I've had this interest in, there's a lot of attention given to global production networks, again, a bit like foundational economy. There's this overemphasis on technology and sort of capitalist production. And I was really interested in looking at what role big or small community spaces play in renewing cultures of making and repair. So one of the things that we did over the last couple of years was organize this learning exchange between, I was based in Germany at the time, a learning exchange between Scottish makers, artisans and activists, and German makers, artisans and activists. So some went up and spent time with networks up in Glasgow and Edinburgh, and others came to us in Munich and had an exchange on how to strengthen these networks. And we conducted some mapping and visualization processes. We did some workshops. And yeah, I think this was really enriching to learn about some of the things people are doing to map. And we worked with MakeWork Scotland, for example, which is worth looking up, that have a sort of directory of manufacturers, local manufacturers in Scotland. So if you need something made, their idea is that they at least make it feasible that you could find someone who could help you with it. But they also do work on sort of communicating what the ethics behind the production is and why you might want to work with those producers and the work that they're doing, essentially. And then to bring this full circle to where I am now, so I've had a sort of a break in lifestyles in a way, from very urban Munich to very rural north of Spain. And it's called often La España Vacía, which is empty Spain, essentially, which is kind of a disrespectful term for these rural areas, which according to someone living in the center of Madrid, these are empty places, but they're really not, they're very vibrant and still very much alive. But what does localization mean, and what implications could it have in these sort of remote rural areas? And to question this idea of emptiness, but to see them as part of this process of localization. So this is really just me pointing out things that are interesting me at the minute in my immediate environment, and what maybe we could think about and learn from them. So in the next village, this is about maybe 1 kilometer or 2 kilometers from my house, is this former factory. I was told it was producing bagpipes, which would seem really obscure, but there is a sort of Celtic music tradition in this part of the world, so it could be true. And it was in complete ruins, basically, and was renovated by the local municipality. And it now houses an ecomuseo, which is like a community-based museum, essentially, or a way of highlighting local heritage, but in a way that's very alive and not based on displaying it in a building, but actually bringing people around in the local area. And they organize things like a lot of participatory workshops on local craft techniques, trying to sort of remember how buildings were made to adapt to the local climate, for example, through bioconstruction. They're doing a lot of research into local food production. So spelt was a very common crop in this area until people became more dependent on industrialized grains, for example. So they're also searching out old forms of spelt grains. Actually, one second. I think if Sophia's still here, she works there. So she can tell us more about that maybe afterwards if there's something relevant that comes up. Yeah, Sophia's in the audience. There's also this building houses a local food and organic buying group, which also works. For example, there's a lot of local food production that often it goes to waste these days because people aren't picking it up or whatever. So it works on food sharing and sort of trying to organize or coordinate food buying and just food sharing as well, for not for monetary purposes. There's also a mead brewery which uses local ingredients. So there's local honey, for example, an organic bakery, and a rural co-working space. These are just some. There's also lots of other things going on in this one relatively small area in empty Spain. So I think this is a really nice example of what can happen when different forces align. The local community, the local municipality, there's also European funding, all sorts of things going into this to create this. Another thing that's struck me as interesting since moving here has been this local network. It's a local map. My neighbor he's one of the younger people who's moved into the area in recent years, and he's also a software engineer. So he's produced this network map where people can post needs, offers, resources, and it's all for free. It's all, yeah, you don't have to pay for subscriptions or anything. And it's already, it's sort of consciously trying to move people off big platforms like Facebook and to sort of give them another space where they could connect and communicate locally. And it ties in with some local WhatsApp groups. And I think it's quite clever actually how they're sort of trying to piggyback off other forms of communication. And yeah, there's a lot of potential here. I think it's in its early stages. As you can see, there's not a whole lot there, and it's always going to be difficult to get these types of things off the ground. But I think it's yeah, their search, as they put it here, for a viable alternative for this valley. So it's trying to connect up a lot of local villages and people in the rural areas here, and get them to think about how they can exchange and support each other in different ways. So in this question of viable alternative, I really like this idea of creating economic microclimates. So in a sense, I think that's kind of what's been happening in this particular valley. It's one of the few municipal areas in the region to manage to reverse its population decline, which has been ongoing since 1990. This is an article interviewing one of the locals, and they're asked, like, how did this happen? You know, how do you stop this demographic challenge where these villages are sort of dying out or emptying? And he says that there is no miracle. It's a work of artisanship over years, which you start to see the fruits of little by little. So it's this very sort of emergent idea of how these different forces aligned, essentially. And he says this ecosystem that we built is fragile. It depends on all the actors being aligned in the same direction, and that must be taken care of. What's happening is not what is happening in the rest of Asturias. Let's say it's like a flower in the desert which grows. So I think this is just a story of hope in a way, but it's also very minimal reversal. When you go back a couple of 100 years, there was thousands of people living in this area. Now there's hundreds. You know, this is really a drastic decline. So I'm not saying that there's a panacea or anything easy. Also, there's other challenges emerging as this happens, as this sort of rejuvenation happens. There's also housing shortages now, rent increases, which is making it difficult for younger people to live. And then there's these ongoing ecological challenges. There's changes in the local climate. There's invasive hornets that came from China that have really affected a lot of the coastline of France and north of Italy and north of Spain. And that's causing it to be very difficult, for example, to produce local honey. So then you have these new challenges emerging in the face of ecological change that people are trying to adapt to and communities are trying to organize against. And whether that succeeds or not is yet to be seen. But yeah, that's kind of my reflection on moving from the global scale down to the local and what it might mean, and how we can foment some sort of local positive microclimates. I think that's the end of my. Yes, I'll stop sharing. I apologize, I'm a bit under the weather, so I've got a cold and I'm not sounding great probably, but I hope you can understand me.
No, this is great. Thanks so much. And so many rich things there too that we could just jump in and start talking about. I'm taking some notes. Anisha's taking some notes. Wondering if people have any like immediate things they want to ask or interject. Marcus.
Yeah, I just have a very short question. I'm curious with the spelt. You said it's research on spelt. Is the spelt at the moment cultivated or any plans on this?
So what we have here are lots of old storage. Every family basically has like a share in a communal storage building. And what they're doing, as far as I'm aware, is they're sort of going out into the community and asking people what they've got lying around essentially and trying to see if it's still viable. So they're trying to find viable seeds, they're trying to grow them out. So there's like an experimental, in the next village, one of the local women has donated part of her allotment. Essentially, like every family here basically has a small plot of land that they grow things on. It's a bit like an allotment, but it's a bit bigger. And yeah, so there's a quarter of that being donated for this, and now they are seeing what's viable and the next steps. I'm not 100% sure what the plans are, to be honest, but yeah, spelt is there's a market for it here, which I think there isn't in a lot of other places. It seems to be just part of the local sort of culinary heritage. So I have a feeling that the idea then is to sort of grow it a bit more and expand it. It was grown at certain altitudes that now have been grown over by forests as sort of cultivation has lessened and things like that. So there's also landscape challenges, and it's a complicated thing. But yeah, essentially they're trying to rescue it and really go out.
And I don't know if Sophia wanted to add anything in addition about the bagpipe factory. No pressure.
Sorry. Yeah, and well, the thing is with the España vacía or empty Spain, yeah, the thing is that there are a lot of rural territories that are currently, well, they always been like defending their territory and having different type of local production system or community-based alternative economic systems. And el Centro Empresarial del Savil, this old factory, now is a very important space also to gather the community and to have different type of events or conversations about these kind of topics. I'm not quite sure about the type of factory. Yeah, there is the thing that it was an old backpack factory, but I'm not sure about the type of factory. But answering to Marcus' question as well, the type of grains, the name is Escanda and the name of the other one is Panizo. These are traditional type of cereals from Asturias. And now we recently submitting a research proposal, and basically the purpose of this project is to bring back this type of traditional cereals because archaeologists from our organization found just one person in the entire territory who is still producing this type of old cereal. But the panizo, for example, that it used to be a grain to feed families, but since now that we have the industrial variety of grain, you can just buy everything in the supermarket and you don't want to produce it anymore. And that's why this person, this farmer, he's producing the grain, but to feed their cows. So, but they basically rescue lots of grain and they're bringing it back to life. And the Skanda as well, like they found like old grains from Skanda and they are bringing them back to life again. And the purpose is just to rescue these varieties that are more nutritional, that are local, that are related to soberanía alimentaria or food soberanía. You know what I mean? So the project, yeah, is really looking forward to keep these systems alive and to be also more autonomous and sustainable. Yeah, thank you. Somebody said in the chat, food, the problem is that I can't pronounce it. I know the word, but I can't pronounce it. That's the problem. So yeah, that's basically the story with the grains and yeah.
Thank you for sharing those details. So many different threads to think about here. So I do recognize we're at the top of the hour. We want to hear from Tim. Do we want like a 2-3 minute break just to rest our eyes, stretch a little, gather our thoughts before we jump into the next hour? Or are people good?
I'm good. I don't know about it. Anyone else can feel free to.
Okay.
I'm good too. I just want to mention, sorry, I actually thought the session was only going till 11:30. Does it run till 12?
I think we had it down for 2 hours, but we thought it'd probably be like an hour and a half. So
Okay. I'll have to leave at about quarter to the hour because I'm teaching a class right at 12.
Oh, that's fair.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'll capture as much as I can and share stuff with you later, but just a heads up.
Thank you. Thank you for your work in advance of teaching.
Oh, worries. All good.
Awesome. Okay, well, anybody can obviously feel free to turn off your camera and take a break too if you need to. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't trampling anybody's needs. And so then let's hear from Tim. Super excited to hear what you've got to add to the mix here.
Okay. Right. I'll try and share. Okay. Is that working?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I've been doing a part-time PhD for quite a while now, but don't really see myself as an academic. I've been involved in kind of community economic development for a long time now. And then I ended up doing a bit of teaching and then got persuaded to do a PhD, which was probably a mistake. But anyway. So I'm going to just talk about some work that we're doing around housing. It kind of reflects a bit what Tom was saying about a challenge in rural areas of kind of gentrification and rent increases, pricing out young people. So I live in the southwest and we work in these three counties, Devon, Dorset and Somerset. And we've been working for about 20 years on community land trusts. These are some of the projects that we've helped to get finished. And so this is the kind of territory in the southwest that we work in. And one of the big challenges we've got is that it's very attractive to retired people. It's very attractive for second homeowners or Airbnb. And that's having a real impact on the ability of young people to stay and work in these areas. But we also work in cities as well, like Plymouth and Exeter and Bournemouth and Poole. So it's not purely rural. Okay, and I guess the question that I'm kind of asking in the research is that we're trying to create community-led housing that's affordable in perpetuity. You know, in the boxes below, you can see the kind of reasons and the sort of approaches we want to take. But the challenge is, how do you create housing that's affordable, but that's also sustainable, regenerative, and supports bioregional economic development? And to what extent are those things kind of in competition or contradictory? You know, is it possible to do all three at the same time? So the research started in sort of in 2017, or at least this was the precursor to it, where we did some work asking in the county that I live, Dorset, how can we use local materials in construction? And we particularly looked at timber as a key material. And then that led us to develop a partnership called Raise the Roof. And we were saying, okay, if we want sustainable and affordable housing, how do we link that to regenerative agriculture and forestry? And what we're going to need is capacity around local processing and manufacturing, but we don't have that. So we got various bits of funding. We pulled together quite an interesting partnership into this Raise the Roof partnership. As I say, I'm in this county of Dorset, which is on the south coast. And one of the things that we've kind of got really interested in is this kind of this question of what are the influences on what we do? So, for example, where I live in Dorset, you have this very interesting geology. I live in Bridport, as I said, and to the west of Bridport, we have all this clay. And to the east of Bridport, just to the east of Bridport, you have this kind of mix of kind of limestone and sandstone. And you also have this sort of landscape where in the red you have these hills. And because of that, you have rivers flowing down. And because of those two features, Bridport, this town where I live, developed an industry of rope and net making. And originally that was based on the growing of flax and hemp. And so these things have started to kind of influence the way we've been approaching sort of thinking about affordable housing and how to bring in the sustainability angle and the bioregional angle. And we had this kind of hypothesis that if we could take local materials, if we could adopt modern methods of construction, so prefabricating off-site, and then having self-finished by residents, that we could make houses more affordable, but also deliver local economic development and sustainability. So we started doing some prototyping. We ran some courses, building little tiny houses. On the right, you can see these trusses that are the roof trusses, and they're sitting along the sort of side panels, which are made of local timber and wood fiber. But the trusses we made in the Fab Lab at Plymouth University using a CNC machine. This is sort of putting them together because we were sort of interested in this sort of intersection between traditional approaches, natural materials, but also these modern methods. We looked around at other examples. This is quite an interesting company in Holland that makes prefabricated hempcrete panels. And so, as I say, because we have this heritage of flax and hemp, we started growing hemp with local farmers. Got some funding to do that. And then this led us into a second stage of prototyping. So we started, we rent a big barn at a farm, used to have lots of cows in it, now doesn't. And we started making prototypes, one-to-one prototypes of kind of housing systems that we wanted to develop. We worked with some young architects to design sort of terraces of houses and think about the kind of cooperative structure that we could link to a community land trust. The trusses that I showed you before were made of plywood, which is imported, which I think is one of the areas that we're kind of looking at, these kind of flows of materials from kind of shadow places beyond Dorset. Anyway, so this is ash that we use to make these cassettes that we then filled with hemp, and this was the hemp and lime mix, but we also experimented with hemp and clay as well. And so then just to finish, where we've got to is we're working with a community housing group in Plymouth. They have planning permission for 10 affordable houses. You can see the ones at the top. And we made a link with an organization called Open Systems Lab, and they've developed an open source kind of structural frame system called WikiHouse that you, again, use a CNC machine to cut out the elements and then you put them together. It's quite an interesting approach because it's quite accessible. It's not necessarily low cost, but it means that we potentially can use local people, train them up and get them to actually build the houses, at least the structural frame. And there's the potential to have a community factory, a makerspace at Whitley, which is a very low-income peripheral housing estate in Plymouth. And as I say, both train people up, but also have that as a facility that in the longer term can do other work around Plymouth. And this is the last slide. This kind of comes back to my kind of research questions, I guess. And so we had this question: how can we weave these different elements together? Because usually houses that are, you know, affordable use terrible materials, and they certainly don't support local economic development. So it is a challenge. And so we've been exploring what those challenges are and how we could overcome them. And then I've been, because this is sort of performative action research, then drawing on Gibson-Graham's politics of possibility, which revolves around, you know, the politics of language, subjectivity, collective action. So as we develop these projects, kind of trying to see how the language we use can support what we're doing, how our sense of subjectivity can shift, both in terms of people's agency, but also in terms of looking at the kind of hybrid research collective that we might be part of. And then, processes of collective action that support this kind of work. And then finally, we're interested in this question of sort of materiality. You know, can an embodied engagement with materials help to generate support for the elements which are often sort of sidelined when we try and develop affordable housing? So the sustainability dimension or the bioregional economic dimension. So that's what I've been trying to explore through this kind of work on the ground. And that's it.
Thanks so much. And those questions, I think, are really central to the kinds of things we're trying to ask in this session too. So, you know, I'd be curious to hear if you've got any answers, or if these are things you're still kind of thinking about, for sure. But those might be questions that come up across, you know, sort of the conversation here too. Anissa, looks like you have a question, and I was also going to ask if you wanted to share anything about your own work. No pressure, but you know, we'd love to know where you're coming from too.
Oh yeah, thanks Christian, and thanks a lot, Tim. I put a couple of things in the chat that you might be interested in. So the postdoc that I've just started here, literally 3 weeks ago, is about assessing the impact of and transforming regional food governance in New England. So that's 6 states in the northeastern US. Vermont, where I am, New Hampshire, Maine, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island. For those not familiar with US geography, and I wasn't before I got here, so I had to look those up and memorize them. Anyway, so and we're working with, it's a participatory action research project, and we're working with as kind of civil society network called Food Solutions New England, which is hosted through the University of New Hampshire and has some partnerships with the Institute for Agroecology, which is where I'm based. And I just met with the author of this book, and he's very interested in regional forestry initiatives. And I know we've got Anna Rudhoff here, who's working on food forestry in the Netherlands. And so she's probably got something to say about this as well. And then the other thing that I wondered is, do you know Stephen Healy in Australia? Tim, have you connected with him at all?
I haven't directly. I mean, I've sat in on a couple of talks that he'd given, and I remember someone saying, "Yeah, you must connect with Stephen." So
you should. Yeah, you should reach out, because I mean, look, I wasn't working directly on this particular case study, but just as a side research project, not related to my PhD, we were doing a project on circular economy in Australia and looking at kind of the social innovations and the different kinds of connections, just taking a more diverse economies perspective to the circular economy. So I was part of a workshop that was linking urban coffee roasters, who of course have all these coffee grounds and also chaff from the coffee. You can think of it as like a pure compost stream, very kind of, in a way, clean, non-contaminated organic material that they don't really know what to do with. And so there's a kind of action research initiative happening right now to try to connect and link up the coffee grounds and chaff that are being produced in the city at an enormous rate. You know, if you think about the city of the size of Sydney and how much coffee people are drinking every day, with farms out in the Central West. And there are a couple of hemp farmers out there who are producing hempcrete. So in terms of like this idea of bioregionalism and how do we link up, you know, different scales of the local and different places to kind of strengthen local economic development or embodied engagement with materials. I think, well, he'd love to talk to you, I'm sure. And I guess the idea of the region is like a central theme of the project that I'm working on. And this idea that the region offers a kind of generative way of engaging with and thinking about governance. This is something that I'm just slowly getting my head around, but I'd be really interested to hear what people think about that. And then if we think about the scale as a strategy in a way, and some things we might want to think about at a regional scale to help with practical things like infrastructure development, or you know, building a cooperative that can be economically viable and that can support livelihoods across different scales and places. Obviously, sometimes the region is, I mean, in the context of this project, it's just kind of defaulted to state territorial regions, like those state boundaries. But there's obviously different ways of thinking about the region, like a bioregion, indigenous territories that would extend across what is now the border between Canada and the US, and different ways of thinking about that. So don't know if there's a question in there, but yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts or anyone's thoughts on the ideas of the region. Thanks.
Just something that comes to mind quite quickly on that is that we've been working with farmers for 3 years now, and the first year we grew a construction variety of hemp, so it kind of focuses on the central woody core that you then separate from the fibers and mix with hemp or clay. And then the second year, because of the nature of funding, you have to do something different the next year. And so the second year we grew a seed variety, and we managed to collect the seed and press the seed, and now we're selling hemp oil. And then this year, we've grown a textile variety, and we've also grown flax. And we're now working with partners across the region to ask those questions about how do we put in place the processing infrastructure for fibers for textiles. And it's really challenging because, you know, it's become a global industry, and, you know, how do you compete with the Chinese and all of our flax processing machinery that we had in our town in Bridport got exported to Portugal, which is fine, but you know, we don't have that capacity. But one of the things we've you know, has become clear just from the practical thing of sort of working with the material is that when you take these bast fibers, which have fiber and they also have this woody core, the first thing you've got to do is to separate that woody core from the fiber. Until you've done that, it's a very, very bulky product, and you don't want to be transporting that across a region. So we're looking at a sort of more localized approach to doing the breaking, and it's called scutching with textiles. And then you have these mills that do the spinning to create the yarn. So we're thinking that's sort of spinning, that next stage, that should happen at a regional level, because you can transport the fiber much more easily than you can transport enormous bales of flax that have all this woody component to them. Anyway, so we're looking at a sort of localized co-ops that then have a secondary co-op at a more regional level to do that next stage of processing. And then that yarn would then feed into an existing set of weaving mills that exist across the region. So it's quite interesting, you know, it's like we've kind of accidentally got involved in textiles, and then it's sort of, when you get involved in the practicalities of it, you see it doesn't probably make sense to do it all at a very local level. And so then you've got to then start thinking about, okay, what are the appropriate scales and yeah, to do it. Anyway, that's just something we've been sort of ended up. I never thought I'd get involved in textiles, but there we are.
Super interesting. Boris, I see you have a hand up.
Yes, if I may.
Of course.
All right, so I have one question for Tim, and then maybe one question for all of you. So Tim, I really liked your presentation. I really like your topic, and I just wanted to say that, well, I'm Polish, and you know, ever since Poland warmly embraced neoliberalism, we have problems with housing. And I'm not the biggest fan of the communist regime, but there were some nice ideas back then, like prefabricating housing, which is ugly, but which was very affordable, and it is surprisingly durable. And it was built, in my case, and when I used to live in Warsaw, from the post-war rubble. So the prefabrication is an interesting idea. But what I would like to ask you to elaborate on, what are the ownership or rental arrangements of these houses? So if you could just, yeah, so if they are affordable, so how you can become an owner or just tenant. So that's my question to Tim, and one question maybe to all of you, because when I did some research on municipal water companies, which was inspired by, as Tom also mentioned, foundational economy, and in this, let's say, progressive discourse, we usually speak a lot about cooperatives or those bottom-up alternatives. But I was wondering whether you have any experience with municipal companies, because sometimes I think that local government and municipal companies are seen as something parallel to the community, which is elected, sometimes they interact, they can be more or less participatory. But in the context I researched, which is the Polish context, we try to equate local government with community, and wonder what a democratically controlled enterprise or municipal enterprise could be. So I was wondering whether you have any thoughts on that topic. I'd be grateful.
Maybe Tim, if you answer the ownership question first, then we can riff on the second question.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those slightly complicated areas. I mean, you know, you can kind of think of housing tenure as being on a spectrum. So you start maybe with kind of social rented affordable housing, and then at the other end of the spectrum you have full market, you know, individual ownership, and then there's a bit in the middle. And so where we started with community land trusts was looking at America, where community land trusts act in this kind of intermediate space. So the idea is that they're not the most affordable houses. That's delivered by, you know, specialist affordable housing providers. But the idea was that the community land trust would own the freehold of the land, and they'd acquire that either free or at a discount, and then exclude that from the cost of the housing. And in America, the community land trusts, they lease the land to somebody who either builds their own house and has that house on leasehold, or the community land trust builds the house and then leases it for the person. And so it's a kind of limited equity model. Your equity is in the lease, and the lease is a 99-year lease, which is then you can sell that lease on, or you can sell it back to the community land trust. So when we tried to introduce that in the UK, we have a different legal system, and so we found it was very difficult to do that. And the way round it was to try and combine a sort of Scandinavian limited equity cooperative model with a community land trust. But again, the banks in England didn't like that. So this was another problem. It's like we had the legal system, then we had the financial system. But ultimately, that's what we are trying to work towards, that you have a community land trust that deals with the land acquisition and getting the planning permission and all of the rest. And then you have a housing co-op, and the housing co-op would either be pure rent. So for example, with young people, when we've done surveys of young people about housing co-ops, most of them say, we don't want to get stuck in a housing co-op. We don't want equity in that housing co-op. We just want to rent at affordable levels, because in a year or 3 years, we might want to move to Bristol or London. Whereas for older people, maybe people in their 30s with a family, they want to start developing that limited equity. So that would be a different model. That'd be a kind of shared ownership, limited equity model. So it's quite sort of complex in a way, kind of working out what the best, it's not a case of the best model. It's about sort of saying, right, what are the needs of the people that want to join, and what's their attitude in terms of rent, equity, or the rest. But the bottom line is always, how can we take that land element out and basically use that, taking the land element out of the market, use that to maintain the affordability in perpetuity, whether people are renting or whether they have this limited equity in the housing. Sorry, that doesn't probably answer your question, but it's...
No, that's very informative, because I see many parallels with some modes we have in Poland. So yeah, that's interesting. So I don't want to hijack the event discussing modes of renting and cooperative renting and whatnot. But yes, thank you, Tim.
Thanks for the question. And I do think the second part of the question about municipal sort of, whether it's municipal services or other elements of municipalism is interesting. So one, I'm an urban geographer, so one of the things that I have been paying attention to is the sort of municipalist movement. And I did have that literature in mind when I was framing this session too, because it seems to me that part of what's going on there is a lot of these kinds of local organizing, local enterprise, thinking about community economies type economic activity, but also thinking about that as a vehicle for building capacity for like participatory processes that can then lead to, whether it's like in the US, there's a couple of examples of like community organizations that have done a lot of organizing and then have used that sort of localist production to do democratic organizing that then captures parts of government and tries to think about collectivizing municipal services, or like the Barcelona model, where there's a lot of communities trying to like honestly think about like how to come up with infrastructures for their own community needs. But then out of those, I noticed you put social infrastructures in your introduction, Boris. Out of those organizing processes, it's not just that you end up with like community Wi-Fi or whatever. You also end up with social infrastructures and sort of like collective sensibilities and capacities and protocols for how you organize and make decisions, potentially then maybe expandable or scalable to thinking about how democracy or governance itself would work at the municipal level, but then also potentially at the regional level, right? So I think there's this idea of thinking about these localist experiments as spaces not only for getting needs met materially, but having them be incubators for different processes that could then be connected to governance, be connected to thinking about connections across regions. And I could imagine even in what Tim is saying, where like you start with one initiative and then you realize, oh, there's actually the potential for this other thing. I haven't said anything about my own research, but one project I'm working on here is an oral history project in a historically Black neighborhood where there's a group of like Black artists and organizers who are using oral history to try to literally create counter narratives in this neighborhood that's often viewed as, it's gentrifying and there's a huge like tech boom and people have moved in and they've had the idea that they are like improving the neighborhood that was, this undervalued space, and they're like have sort of a savior complex. So they're part of what they're trying to do is literally create counter narratives and counter imaginations and understandings of what this space would be. But one of their main methods is to throw big parties and to organize big events, and then like the neighbors will call the cops on them, or they'll sort of understand the politics at the neighborhood level, and then they try to use what they learned to organize policy to change the neighborhood to be more conducive to the needs of different kinds of communities, and thinking about like what an arts-based economy would look like based on kind of throwing events and then seeing what needs pop up, and then thinking about organizing policy and trying to do like municipal organizing from there. So I actually hear that in what Tim's saying, and I hear that in a couple other things too. And I do think this connects to the idea of the region. I'm just riffing on connections now. But that's one thing that I'm interested in too, is thinking about like how each of these initiatives opens up additional things that then ask broader questions. And those could be questions of, material things like Tim's talking about, but also subjective questions, questions of processes and protocols for how you make decisions, how you organize, how you scale up. And I think, there's a lot that could be learned just thinking about the different things everybody here has put out, and the sort of different issues that are opened up, and then how people are dealing with and making decisions around those things, and thinking strategically about regionalization or other connections and things like that. So thanks for the question. I think
Thanks
there's a
for
lot.
thanks for the answer. And did you have in mind Jackson when you meant about?
Yeah, for sure. That's
all
one
right.
of the big, cooperation, Jackson, for sure. And I don't know if anybody else has insights from your own work that resonate with any of that, or things that people are doing to actually interface with municipalities or local governance, or maybe not.
That could well be the case that there is little of that.
Yeah, I just wouldn't have anything to add that wouldn't be better established through, for example, Tim's work or something. I grew up in Ireland, which is like the most centralized state in Europe. So we just don't have, the municipal level isn't anything that we even have access to or have any ability to see it as anything emancipatory at all. It's a really like strange and depressing situation there. So now that I'm here and just observing how porous the municipal level is, it's really exciting for me, because I've been following like the possibilities that are there at that level. And for example, like Tim, our common colleague Nadia, has always been very she's always placed great importance on involvement in the municipal level, for example, in the Czech Republic. So the role that can play in forestry and hunting and local food and all sorts of interesting things that pop out of that. So yeah, I think it's got loads of potential. It depends on where you are, I guess. And so no, and same with the region. I think there's loads of interesting things like that emerge from this area, as well as to how the region transgresses all those boundaries that I thought when I moved here existed. And then it turns out the valley is something that needs to be considered broader than the municipality and all these other things. But yeah, they're overlapping, and I really like it. And Boris, I just wanted to point out that session, because there will be quite a heavy, Marcus is probably involved more than me, but in this sort of group that are interested in community economies in Central and Eastern Europe, and that's a session I think heavily focused on that space. So that might be interesting. Yeah, that I just linked to in the chat.
All right, thanks.
I mean, just on that thing of municipal connections. So I'm involved in this other organization called Dorset Community Energy. So we started about 10 years ago, and it was a joint project with Dorset County Council. And the attraction for us was that they have a whole load of schools, and the attraction for them was that we could raise money from local people to then put photovoltaic on, panels onto the school roofs. And so since then, we've raised about 1.5 million, done about 30 installations. Last year, we saved the schools and hospitals about £250,000 off their energy bills. And that sort of allows us then to go back to them and say, okay, what's next? So what's next? One of the projects is around retrofit, because this is a big issue. And Dorset Council is buying properties because they have a responsibility to provide accommodation for people in need, temporary accommodation. But often the properties that they buy need to be retrofitted. And we want to set up a training program for young people in retrofit, but the colleges aren't set up to deliver training around retrofit. They deliver training on new build. And so we're exploring a partnership with the municipality where they buy these properties, and then we run the training programs for young people to retrofit the houses. And then we'll have people who can go on and do retrofit on other places as well. So we're finding that, although obviously there are challenges, that there are ways of working quite well with local municipalities in this particular space. So it's just an example.
Thanks. Very nice example. Very, I like the project very much. That you enter into education and you try to, train the people, and then they immediately find kind of employment or sort of, put their skills to work. That's very nice. Local economy thinking, I'd say.
Like that. Any other questions anybody has for one another, or themes that people want to pick up on? I got a couple other notes about things that caught my attention that I was interested in, but anybody else have anything that
I
Yeah.
have a question, if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it, Sophia, and then Marcus, I
Or
saw your hand too.
yeah, Marcus. I didn't saw your hand. You can ask if you want. You can go.
No, anyway, I was just about to open also the room to exactly you and you, Boris, and also Anna. Maybe if you also want to share in light of what you heard so far, I don't know how you can relate to some of the themes that we touched upon so far. Would be just curious also to hear your reflections, but also reflections based on your own work.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic.
Okay. Okay, yeah. Well, I wanted to ask, well, so far we've been talking about localization, like local production and local manufacturing, housing, other stuff. But I would like to ask to all of you, like, what do you think about epistemological or ontological localization when we talk about knowledge, for example? In my last research project, I worked with Mayan weavers, and the topic was indigenous intellectual property rights, but it was more about non-material extractivism. Like, for example, these designers or fair trade organizations that are plagiarizing the indigenous traditional textile patterns and designs. And so it's pretty interesting how designers are like, the concept is performative allyship. They portray themselves as allies, and they want to help local artisans or producers. But at the end, they ended up creating their own brands, and they get a lot of money for the products, and the local artisans are still living in extreme poverty conditions. And this type of extractivism also happens in an epistemological level and ontological level as well, but also in an academic level. There are academics pretty interested now in the topic of indigenous intellectual property rights. And I was talking to the Mayan weavers, and they were sharing with me a big frustration they have, like, we can't publish our knowledge or our work about indigenous intellectual property rights because we are not academics. So for us, it's like very frustrating. We have to quote or cite other academics about topics we are working on, like they are indigenous activists, indigenous artisans, and they are the ones who did all the work about indigenous intellectual property rights. But if it's not published in a peer-reviewed journal, then you are not the owner of that knowledge, right? So we tend to give a value to local production about like products and like artisanal manufacturing or stuff, but also how can we give more value to the local knowledge, especially from academia, because nowadays academia is so industrialized. And if you don't have a PhD, if you don't have a degree, then you can't publish, and then your knowledge is not available. But how can we give more platforms to those forms of knowledge that are completely valid and available and that are important as well to avoid this other type of extractivism? So localism is really interesting to reflect also in an epistemological and ontological level. So what do you think in your own research experience? How do you give more value to the local knowledge when you talk or interview community leaders or community activists or artisans or farmers? That was more like my question.
Yeah, great question. I'm hearing like questions of extractivism that sort of came up in some of the presentations, but also potentially enclosure of particularly different kinds of knowledge. And I definitely hear that. Marcus, you had a hand up, and Boris also has a hand up. What are we thinking?
I can only say in my case, because I mean, these are tricky questions, right? With Armenia and Georgia, me being a researcher also from Germany. What I can say, and this is really interesting, let's say, so there was this wine producer, Natanadze, right? So he's basically also using some of the grapes that might also some subsistence farmers grow. So it was never entirely lost. And the whole, I think, point about why right now Georgi Natanadze is actually, if you just click on Google Georgi Natanadze, like, he's famous. You can find him on documentaries and so on and so forth. So his voice is heard. He doesn't need also academic journal output for this, he's heard. But he also says, like, if I studied conventional wine industry, which would told me to get economies of scale whatsoever, I wouldn't have achieved this. So his basic idea was like, I will just do what my ancestors did. But I think the point of why he's right now so famous, why his opinion counts, why people from abroad come to him and recognize his knowledge, it's precisely the fact that it's market-based transactions right now. If he continued to do it as a subsistence farmer, probably nobody would care. That's just my assumption, but precisely because he's also a successful entrepreneur, people become really interested in all these things. And it's just also a question back if this is something that you can probably, or if this is something that you can also observe in your cases. This is a really big assumption that I have in Armenia and Georgia, where actually these capitalocentric ideas still continue to be very powerful. The more market-based, the more market successful you are, the more people listen to you. And if you're the subsistence farmer, then not. Then your knowledge doesn't count. And the guy also knows how to connect actually the language Like he knows how to connect, let's say, this local epistemology with language of, let's say, permaculture with the language of the market. And I think that makes it very appealing also to international audiences.
Boris, what are you thinking? Anissa's got to go teach. Thank you so much for joining us and helping us out.
No, I do have to go, but sorry, Boris, do you mind if I just quickly jump
No,
in?
please.
I jump out. Just to share a little bit more about what I wrote in the chat and in response to Sophia. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this civil society and indigenous peoples mechanism. It's a little bit of an abstract idea, but they're working at the international level. This is food sovereignty movements, fisher folks, pastoralists, urban food insecure, consumers groups, indigenous peoples, youth, women, NGOs. They've been organizing for many decades. It kind of came out of La Via Campesina, which some of you might have heard of, the transnational peasant movement. In any case, they now actually have the formal right to participate at the United Nations Committee on World Food Security. It's the only UN body where non-state actors have the formal right to participate in all aspects of policy making. So they're involved in agenda setting, evaluating, contributing to expert reports that inform policy negotiations. It's actually quite a unique, totally unique and very exceptional space that is constantly having to be defended, of course, in the face of a lot of pressures. But the high-level panel of experts of that committee explicitly recognizes forms of traditional, local, and indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing, and those are incorporated into their reports so that when it gets to the policy and negotiation stage, there is a research report that actually brings together not just academic knowledge, but the knowledge of practitioners and people on the ground to kind of inform the discussion of what the policy could be. And it's proved to actually be very effective in particular in the negotiations on agroecology that happened over the last few years, and that really served to differentiate industrial innovations, like all this biotechnology, synthetic biology, and so on. And a lot of these processes are trying to kind of co-opt agroecology and dilute it and make it into a kind of technical process versus political agroecology, which is really about a social movement and transforming governance and politics. So I just wanted to share that. I think it's a really inspiring example. Yeah, just to show us that like it's possible, right? It can be done.
Thank you, Anissa. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, happy to talk more before I go. I'll just, I don't know if you can see this. Wait, it's my screen.
It's invisible.
It's like, hold
We
on,
can't because you have a background.
no, let me take it away. Hold on. Wait a second. I just want to show, I'll send it to you. But I know I've turned it off entirely. Hold on. Where do we go?
You can see some of it.
Yeah,
There's
hold
a lot
on.
of little words there and some
Hold
pictures.
on. There we go.
Oh, nice.
So you
That's
can't
great.
view any of it, but there's some notes from the session. We've got a wine vat there,
Wow.
some hemp and some hempcrete, some the flower of the desert, which was in a Spanish quote on one of the presentations. Tom, I think, was yours.
That's
And
great.
I'll take a photo and I'll share it with you. And I have a
above and beyond.
Thanks everybody, and have a great rest of your discussion, and look forward to seeing you at other sessions.
Thank you so much.
Oh.
Happy teaching.
Awesome, Anissa. Yeah, bye-bye.
That's great. So I know Boris had a comment. Anna, I don't know if you wanted to jump in and say anything, no pressure, but we'd love to hear your thoughts too.
I did have some thoughts in response to what Marcus just said, but I actually I had it in my mind, and then now like Anissa started talking about other things, I forgot.
That's fair. Totally fair.
Yeah, so I don't know if anyone else, yeah, for me, I am not like fully in the same like focused on production per se, so I don't feel like I have like that much to add in that sense. But yeah, I think yeah, what were you talking about again, Marcus? Maybe it'll jog my memory.
I was talking that with this question about is the traditional knowledge valued, I said
Oh yes,
precisely
yeah.
because it's entrepreneurial.
Yes. Okay, yeah. I remember again. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I really recognize a lot that yeah, this kind of like market-based approach to spreading also like traditional knowledge. I feel that that is happening a lot in the Netherlands with food forestry as well. Also because I think of the ties with permaculture and the permaculture movement. And in permaculture, I think you see that a lot as well, where you really have these permaculture almost missionaries who go everywhere to sort of spread the gospel of permaculture and fly over the world, you know, like it's quite ironic in a way. But one thing that I did want to see is that in some cases I feel like it's really like a market-based thing, but in other cases I think it also is just a different take on being entrepreneurial or being yeah, just be using that skill that you see also in these businesses, but for something else. And yeah, I have like one really clear example in mind, which is like a really prominent food forestry figure in the Netherlands, who's pretty much made food forests like a household name in the Netherlands. So yeah, it's kind of like, of course, interesting to see that food forests are especially big in the Netherlands and not permaculture or agroecology or any of these other things that are very closely related, but that the name food forest specifically has yeah, gained so much prominence. And I think that is really largely due to the efforts of this one guy who took forest gardens from England, from the UK, from Martin Crawford, and yeah, took it to the Netherlands and called it a voedselbos or a food forest, and that became a thing. And he's just been on in the media a lot. He's has a lot of attention on him. And yeah, a lot of it I don't think is necessarily by promoting this market-based capitalist ideas, but really just using kind of that mentality or something that you see in enterprises as well, and use it to sort of promote something else or an alternative. So I thought, yeah, I don't know, like I think there's two ways to sort of view that in a way, maybe. But yeah, maybe it's also a naive take on that. I don't know.
That's super interesting. I saw you put up a hand for a second.
Sorry, did we talking to me, Chris? Or
Yeah, I thought you
Oh,
had
no.
your hand up for just a second.
No, it's okay. I was going to encourage Anna. Yeah, just she spoke about it perfectly. So
Right on.
I was just interested in Anna's project and how it would relate to that as well.
Yeah.
I have some thoughts around also this openness of knowledge and local knowledge, and like for example the Wiki House with Tim. I think there's really interesting questions around what cultures, how you share knowledge, and anyway, that's a whole 2-hour session. But Boris had a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to Sofia quickly, if I may. So for the question, yeah, about epistemologies. So I think it's very important. I really like that question. And I was initially trained in economics, and I know there are economists here, like non-classical economists, but I thought that it has very little traction with reality. So I was wondering about exactly what epistemology or ontology I could use to make some useful research. And to cut a long story short, I found some consolation in the pragmatic philosophy, pragmatism. And the question is like, what type of knowledge you want to develop, and what type of knowledge, or with what type of knowledge you can get away in your institution. So pretty much what I did was to select a problem to research that is relevant for the community I'd like to work with. So that's why I ended up with municipal water companies, not because I was interested in it, but because they had an issue to resolve. So I framed the entire research in a kind of pragmatic manner about helping them navigate the issue they had, the clash with central government. And so I think that's the one way to start, like just to research what is relevant for people who you like to research. But then comes the question then how far you can get away with this in academia, because it was then accused of being partisan or just a story. But in the end, I kind of found some balance that I made it publishable. I was told by the reviewers to cut out the pragmatist thing, but other things could stay. But I also was publishing, just writing for the community. So when I was doing fieldwork, I was asking them, what do you want me to research? And they said, look into this and that. So it was evolving all the time. And in the end, they asked me just to write for them, and they were publishing what I've written for them in their outlets. So kind of double writing it is, but at least it was to an extent useful for them. And one last point, there was Regional Studies Association conference in Florence, and there was one scholar from Newfoundland, Canada. He was an indigenous scholar, and he came also with chiefs from Newfoundland there. And they were also he was trying to develop a research project which are useful for the Newfoundland community, but the chiefs wanted to help him progress with his PhD. So there was also this mutual cooperation and mutual understanding of what these two types of knowledge required. So if you want, Sophia, I can try to look it up and send you, because he was doing very nice work, I think, in this regard.
Thank you, Boris. That's really, really nice. Yeah, actually, well, the thing is you ask what is useful for the community when you do your research. But after the research, for example, in the case of the Mayan weavers, they were telling me we get so much students and postdoctoral researchers and constantly working with us, and then they go away and they publish and they never come back. And it's why can't we be friends or have a relationship? They were telling me we would like to have a relationship or something else after they work with us and after they publish. That's something that I did. For example, I did this research 2 or 3 years ago, 2 years ago. And then we had a project, and I invited the Mayan weavers here into Europe to have an exchange with weavers from Bavaria, and we had an exhibition. So we kept the alliance alive, and it's still alive after 4 years, 5 years now. And we are in constant communication and trying to keep working together. So it's about localism, the reflects on localism, how to improve also the local production for related to knowledge and epistemology, but also to give value to local forms of ontology as well. But it's really nice, the answer you gave me, and you can send me. I put my email in the chat, or I think it's deleted now or not, but I'm gonna send my email, and feel free to send whatever.
All right.
Thank you.
I've got the chat saved, so I think I see your email in there, Sophie. I think we're good. You'll be in the follow-up. I love it. Well, we are at time. I could keep talking about a lot of this stuff. I feel like there's separate sessions that could emerge around a bunch of different questions, and there's things we didn't get to, but that to me is a good ending, because it means there's plenty to follow up on as we continue the conversation. So I'll hang around in this space for a couple more minutes if anybody wants to chat, but thank you so much, everybody, for coming, and to those of you who were willing to jump in and present on this. Super rich and generative. This feels energizing and maybe even a tiny bit hopeful to me on a day where I could use both energy and hope. So I appreciate you all, and thanks so much for coming.
Thank you for organizing. It's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for facilitation, Chris. Yeah, Kristen.
Thank you, everyone. It was really great.
Thank you, everyone, and good luck with your projects and work. Greetings from Asturias.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks so much,
Bye
Christy.
bye. Ciao.
Ciao.
So nice. So you're also both staying for a couple of minutes. I was just
Oh yeah, I just want to say goodbye, but in a slower way, just say goodbye to Christian. I thought that was really nice and really well. And it's 7 in the morning, so I apologize a little bit for the scheduling. It's not ideal, but
No, that's all good. I think I was the only North American, so it made sense for me to defer to what you all had going on. Like it.
Yeah,
And
thanks for organizing this.
Of course. Thank you for participating. This was great. And like I said, like I am not as involved in some of these kinds of projects as you all are. So I'm really using you, and it was super useful. I will say, Tom, the question you raised about why the right has captured the discourse around a lot of this stuff is very much on my mind, obviously today, but also generally, because I do think some of the things we're talking about are actually pretty politically urgent to think through in relation to that question. And I have some thoughts and ideas.
If you want to ever write them down and just send them along, and I'd love to read or have another conversation at some point, that'd be nice. Yeah.
Okay, rad.
Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely have. They're pretty specific to the US context, I think, but
sure.
I do think there's some stuff in the history of community economies research too that speaks to maybe what happened in some places and didn't happen in others that we could think about. Yeah, I'll definitely write that up.
Yeah, it sounds great. Sounds
Love
great.
it.
Okay, I'm gonna head off. It's been a long afternoon, but
yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for hanging with us, even though you have a cold.
No, yeah, not feeling great, but yeah, sending hugs from Spain. I'll see you guys later.
Thank you so much.
Let's stay in touch. Bye-bye.
And you hung all the way through, Marcus, even though your back hurts.
Yes.
Very nice. Thanks. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. And write a follow-up mail. I also try to recover a bit. But thanks for organizing this. And in case you have any ideas or want to brainstorm how to move forward with this, let me know. I think it's an exciting discussion and needs or could benefit from a follow-up.
No, for sure. My plan here is I have the chat, I have everybody's contact information. I will send an email that sort of summarizes, some of the things that emerged with Anissa's drawing, and just, to think about potential follow-ups. I think what I might ask is for people to share maybe a little bit more, just like a description of who they are, what they're working on, and sort of what questions, and if they have any ideas for things they'd like to see continued in the future. Because I can imagine a couple different things. Like I know, there's the CERN Latin America group, for example, is putting together a reader that thinks with different local communities about like community economies kinds of concepts, and it's actually targeted at like not academics but members of the public to think about like CERN ideas. So I could see putting together something like a reader, a map, some kind of an exchange where we're sharing ideas and resources, or we have like dialogues. I have all kinds of different, I think it'd be cool to keep connected and keep the conversation going in different ways. So I think what I'll do is I'll write it all up and I'll ask people to share what they're interested in and share ideas, and then see how it goes from there. But I'm definitely into it.
Awesome. And I think this sounds good. And just as an offer, if you think like you need somebody to brainstorm, or just if you have a question before you want to send something out, I'm definitely here to support you in this task somehow, because it sounds exciting.
Fantastic. I appreciate that. And I may take you up on it too, just to see if it's hitting everything that so we can live up to our best potential.
Nice, Christian. You're so energized so early in the morning. That's so cool.
Lots of coffee. Talk to me again in a few hours. I'll probably be a lot more mellow, but
So I hope you'll have also hopefully not too unpleasant evening in front of you. And yeah.
I appreciate that.
Have a good day then.
You too. I hope your back feels better. Thank you so much.
Yes, it's all right. Thanks.
Okay.
Bye-bye, Christian.
Bye. Thank you.